other students. I was in high school in 1976. 1976 is the year when we started the students' protests, generally known as the Soweto Students' Uprising. So we were arrested in our case out of a meeting where we were planning yet another student protest march, which was aimed at securing the release of the students who had been detained in previous protest marches. Unfortunately, the security police got wind of the meeting. They came and arrested us. There were 43 in that meeting. They arrested us. They later charged us for a conspiracy to commit terroristic acts and sabotage. Of that group of 43, 10 state witnesses, 2 was acquitted, 31 ended up here for 5 years. So that generation of 76, there were many others from other parts of the country. We ended up in a section just like this one, but separate from the prisoners who came in the 60s. That section is at the southern end of the prison. And at that time, prisoners that were kept in separate sections were not allowed to interact or communicate with one another. If you were kept in this section, you were limited in terms of your freedom of movement to within this yard of your section. And you were not allowed to communicate with prisoners in other sections. If you did that and you were caught, you were punished. Now the cells would take up to 50 people. Each cell would take up to 50 people, its capacity. So a section had a capacity of 200. Of course, we later learned, in later years, we were integrated with the prisoners that came in the 60s. Some of us even ended up at the single cells. And we began to meet the delegation of the International Committee of the Red Cross, which by that time was allowed to visit this prison every year. And then we picked up information that, in fact, as a younger generation, many of the things we were not happy about in this prison, about which we even protested, were an improvement to what actually attained in the 60s. So that the number of 50 in a cell was an improvement to 100 in the 60s.
Wow.
So in the 60s, we put 100 in the cell. In fact, that number, or the overcrowding of the 60s, was one of the contributing factors to prisoners, many prisoners in the 60s, dying from TB. There was a problem of TB in the prison. But due to the overcrowding, it spread through the prison very quickly.
Sure.
Also in the 60s, they had no hot water.
Oh my.
They showered with cold water. When we arrived as a generation here, we protested and demanded better quality water. The reason, the hot water in the showers was desalinated seawater. It was not particularly salt. The cold water, both in the showers and the taps, was seawater. When you mix the two, you're virtually showering with salty water.
My goodness.
And when you are showering with salty water, be careful, never use soap. Soap doesn't lather in salty water. And if you use soap, despite that, when you finish, you end up looking like a person who's taken fat and you mix it with the ash and you smear it all over yourself. So the quality was that poor. So we were demanding better quality water. It was in that context that we then learned that, in fact, had we been here before 1973, we would have had more reason to complain, because then they showered with cold water. We were demanding beds, because on arrival, prisoners were given 2 mats on which you slept, and then 4 blankets. We were demanding beds. And then we learned from the International Committee of the Red Cross that, look, they were saying to us, we are not saying we're not going to take up your complaints and demands with the authorities, but we want to warn you that here you need to learn to be patient. Because change takes a very long time. And they were saying, you know why we're saying that? These beds that you are demanding, you are not the first ones to demand beds here. These guys, when they came here in the 60s, they demanded beds because they were sleeping on 1 mat. You got 2 mats. You'll know why you got 2 mats. They were sleeping on 1 mat, on floors that were still damp. So they were demanding beds. And the response of the authorities was to say, look, there are no prisoners that sleep on beds in South Africa. They all sleep on mats. And there's nothing special about you that would warrant us giving you beds. The best that we can do is to give you an extra mat. Hence today, to us, you are sleeping on 2 mats, in contrast to the guys who came in the 60s that were sleeping on 1 mat. We will still take up this issue, but we're not guaranteeing anything. Fortunately, we were a generation that did not accept no. You may say no to us. Remember, many of us were high school students, teenagers. The mistake that they made when we arrived here was to keep us in a section on our own as youngsters without an adult amongst us. You see? So we became quite a handful very quickly, you know. We worked at the limestone quarry, which you'll see when you go around by bus. We protested working at the quarry. We refused to work at the quarry. We had issues with the warders to such an extent that in 1977, they set dogs on us at the quarry, the warders, as we were striking. And fortunately, we pushed them to such an extent that we succeeded to get a case opened against the prison warders. Something that was rare when it comes to Robben Island. Managed to get this outside, and it went into court, and we won the case in court, and they got negative publicity. And the International Committee of the Red Cross also used the information around the world, to such an extent that by 1979, they began changing. They introduced beds in 1979. They then allowed prisoners to buy newspapers. Up until then, prisoners had no access to any form of news media, whether print or electronic. Right? They changed the prison diet. When we arrived here, the prison diet was based on racial classification. It was poor nutritional. No fruit, no vegetables. And the amount of food you got would depend into what racial group you were classified. There were even foodstuffs that were not common between the 2 racial groupings. For example, this group would get bread, this group would not qualify for bread. This group would get a beverage called Puzamanda, this group would not qualify for that beverage. And if you shared the foodstuffs that were not common across racial lines and were caught, they will charge you for engaging in smuggling food in prison.
Wow.
So these are some of the dynamics that we have to deal with. So in the 80s, they changed the prison diet so that we're getting the same food, not based on racial classification. They introduced vegetables. By the 80s, they allowed prisoners to get fruit. By the 80s, they allowed prisoners to have television sets in prison. I mean, the guys who came in the mid-80s, things had changed completely. So much that some of them were even not wearing prison uniform if they liked in prison. They were wearing tracksuits. And they had a tuck shop in prison. They could keep monies in their persons and go and buy at the tuck shop. However, to get a visual idea of how the change came about, I'm going to take you to that section.
Okay.
Because in that section, it has 4 cells just like this one. We have set up the cells in such a way that they would approximate as closely as possible how the cells would have looked over the different decades. So one cell looks the way the cells would have looked in the 60s, the other one looks the way the cells would have looked in the 70s, the other one looks the way the cells would have looked in the 80s. So you can get a sense of the changes that came about at the time. Yeah.
What time did you leave?
I came 77, released in 82. I did 5 years.
5 years.
Let's go this way, guys.